So I think we're going to go ahead and get started. I hope that you are here for Cece Bell's panel about Deafo. I'm Susan Van Metre. I'm editor-in-chief at Abrams Books, the publisher of Deafo, and also Cece's editor for the book. So we're going to be talking a little bit about some of the decisions that went into making the book and the process of making it, and we'll have time at the end for you to ask questions. And if you do have a question, if you would come up and I'll hand you a microphone to speak into, that would be great. So we have quite a lot of slides to share with you, so we'll go ahead and get started. For those of you who haven't read the book, it is a graphic novel memoir of Cece's life from age 4 to 10, and begins with her losing her hearing to meningitis and the process of learning to lip read, learning to get used to an extremely large hearing aid named the phonic ear. I felt like I developed a relationship with the phonic ear over the process of making the book too, and I actually got one of the funny jobs of being an editor is you have to seek permission to use certain images or names, and phonic ear is a trademark name, so I actually had to get in touch with the makers of the phonic ear and share the book with them and get their permission to use the name, and they were extremely, I have to say, extremely supportive, even though the phonic ear doesn't always come off well in the book. But anyway, we will get started with our questions, and I think one of the questions that I hear the most from people that I thought we would just get out of the way from the beginning is why rabbits?
Okay, why rabbits? So in real life, this is sort of what I looked like, or this was what I looked like, in about the first grade. And you can see the cords going up to my ears. Those are the cords from the phonic ear. But as you can tell, I am not a rabbit. That's too bad. But so in the book, I am a rabbit and everyone else is a rabbit. And the main reason for that was this is a book about hearing and hearing loss. And rabbits have really big ears and they can hear really well. And I sort of felt like the one rabbit in a school of rabbits who had the giant ears for show almost, but they didn't work. But more importantly to the book is, and the visual aspect is in real life, the cords went up to the sides of my head where my ears are. In the book, I got to draw the cords and the earpieces going all the way over my head into these rabbit ears, and that was much closer to how it felt. Like I felt very conspicuous, very visible, and like everybody was looking at me all the time, even though they weren't. You know, they'd gotten used to me pretty soon. But that was a better representation of what I felt like. So that's why the rabbit.
So, Cece, this was your very first graphic novel.
Right.
Also your first memoir, also your first book of over 64 pages, because you'd done some picture books and some early readers, but this was a lot
up here.
Longer. So that's a lot of firsts for one book. Can you tell us a little bit about your previous work and also why you decided to write this one?
Okay. So I, before the graphic novel, I did a lot of picture books, and I'm still doing picture books, and in fact that's probably more my thing in some ways. And so I never really thought too hard about writing a book about my personal experience with deafness, I think because I didn't want to be pigeonholed right away as, oh, that deaf writer, that deaf illustrator. I wanted to be, oh, that illustrator and writer, she's pretty good, but I didn't want anything else in that description. So, but in a way, I have a book, Bee-Wigged, that is maybe the closest I came to autobiography before Deafo, And it's basically the story of a giant bee who was about the size of a 5-year-old and really wants to make friends with people. And I think that's how I felt like. I felt like a giant bee. And in the book, the character is Jerry Bee. In the book, he finds a giant wig and puts it on his head and immediately looks just like a boy. I mean, that's exactly what a boy looks like. So we all know that he's a bee with a wig on his head. But so Jerry ends up making friends simply by being helpful, funny, artistic, generous, and a good student. And those were all things that I aspired to be in an effort to sort of overcompensate for my deafness. But then something happened in which it's kind of a long story, but it was an awkward conversation between me and a grocery store cashier in which she got very, very frustrated and angry with me because I couldn't understand her. And the whole situation could have been solved with me simply saying, "Hey, lady, I'm deaf. Here are my hearing aids." And I didn't do that because I never did that. I could never say the words, "I am deaf. Could you please repeat that? I've got hearing aids." Those were really hard things for me to say. And so I got angry with myself in that moment for not saying, "Hey, I'm deaf, all right." So I started a website called ldefo.com, and just a few people were reading it. And it was more like me complaining about situations that I was finding myself in. And so some friends were reading it and really thought, this would make a good book. Don't put this online, save it. And around that time, I was reading Smile by Raina Telgemeier. And I realized, I can tell this story this way in graphic novel format. And mostly because of, and because Raina, the visual aspect of her story and the way she's got that, the Novocaine and how visual that is, I just felt like this is the perfect way to do this. So, and that's because of speech balloons. And once I realized that I could use the speech balloons in the book to give hearing people an experience of what it's like to be a deaf person who uses hearing aids, that's when everything came together. For example, in the lower left-hand panel, when I'm losing my hearing in the hospital, the words begin to fade. And so the reader is thinking, something's not right here. And then there's more powerful moments when the speech balloons are empty to represent the moments when I can't hear. And just like this one. And then probably most importantly for me is any speech balloon that's filled with garbled speech like this that doesn't quite make sense, because ever since I've lost my hearing, that is exactly what speech sounds like to me always. Even I can understand people, but only when I can see them. When they turn away, that's always what it sounds like. And it was really important to be able to show people that. And also the readers, especially hearing people who read the book, get confused about this and have to look at the rest of the panel to figure out what's going on, which is exactly how I operate. I always, I don't get everything, so I have to look around. And so the readers get this really immediate sense of, this is kind of what it's like. So, everybody sounds like they're underwater. And whoops. And so that's a long answer. But
It's a good
but I mean, it was the graphic novel really felt like the right way to tell this story. So I'm really glad I waited. And I saw Smile and had some of the experiences that sort of pushed me out there. Yeah. Okay.
So speaking of Smile, Smile has been on the New York Times bestseller list for almost 200 weeks.
Yeah.
Deafo won the Newbery Honor this one summer by the Tamaki's won a Prince and a Caldecott, and Nimona was a National Book Award finalist. So it seems as if graphic novels are having a mainstream moment, particularly graphic novels by women.
Right,
So
right.
What do you think is going on?
Well, I'm not 100% sure, but I think that I was talking to Jillian Tamaki, and she thinks that the women are coming to the medium from a very different place and a very different point of view, and our experiences with comics were very different from sort of, I think we all sort of envision the boy with a stack of superhero comics. And, that may or may not be true. But, for example, Jillian came to all of this more from the world of picture books. I came from picture books. And my experience with any kind of comics was more from my older brother, who had a stack of National Lampoon, and which I should not have been reading, but I loved it, and because it was interesting. But that was just we come from, I think, different places, and so we're bringing different kinds of storytelling that still seem kind of fresh and different, and maybe even we're telling some more intimate stories, more personal stories in a way that people can relate to. So that might be part of it. Yeah.
That sounds.
Yeah.
That sounds smart. So let's talk a little bit more about the making of El Deafo.
Okay.
We talked about it's 240 pages, so a lot longer than the 64 pages that you have been used to illustrating before. So how long did it take you?
Okay, it took about 5 years, and I think that the very first thing that I gave to Susan was a pretty detailed outline and a completed chapter, a drawn chapter. And bizarrely, with that little bit of information, you went ahead and jumped in. And so that was early on. And then it took me a long time to get that outline ready, but the whole process from writing the outline to the completion was about 5 years, with 3 of those years were me also working on other projects. And 2 of those years were more like, this is a 9-to-5 job, but not just Monday through Friday. And it felt like it was every day, and you're in this sort of tunnel that you can't get out of. But I got out of it, yeah. Right. So about 5, yeah.
So I got to share some of that journey with you. And I know that you made thousands of decisions. And I think that there's a tremendous amount going on visually in the book. One of the most notable things to me was that from the moment I read that outline was that you were going to have to age yourself from 4 to 10,
right,
and everybody else over the course of the book too.
Right.
So let's look at some of the...
Just some photo reference. So the very beginning of the book is me at about 4, and in the beginning of the book, I'm wearing this bathing suit, which I wore apparently, according to legend, family legend, every day for maybe 9 months straight. I think that's about right. Something like that. And no other clothes. So that's me there. And I remember a long time ago reading, if you want a character to look young, maybe they're wider and their eyes are, the farther apart those eyes get, the cuter the character. And so, the eyes maybe get closer and closer. But so there's me a little bit older in kindergarten with that sort of I'm lost and confused. And then I'm getting a little tougher, maybe a little more used to it. And then my favorite school picture, because I'm like, I'm gonna show them. So that's sort of me kind of a little bit coming into my own. I like that expression. Me being a little, a little more self-assured. And then by the end of the book, in real life, that's what I looked like in about the 5th grade, and that near the end of the book there. So I basically start out wide, and I just got narrower and taller, and the eyes maybe get a little closer. It was more a lengthening, and but the hair is pretty much the same throughout because it was always that way. And so, so that was a little bit of that photo reference and aging part.
I think something else to make note of is that the main character is actually two characters. It's young Cece, but then it's Cece's alter ego, Deafo, who has her own experiences, and how you visually separated those two arcs.
Oh, okay. So anytime, this is maybe the beginning, the first time I sort of see myself as Bruce Wayne, Batman, Cece Bell, Deafo. That's the beginning of that. And anytime Deafo shows up, Deafo is sort of, for me, it was a fantasy of that whole notion of when you look back on situations that you were in and you think, oh, what I should have done, what I should have said. And so that's the sort of, there's always a thought balloon surrounding those fantasies. So, you know, this is sort of the whole gist of the book is the fact that, you know, that fantasy was popped all the time because people would remind me, or I would be in situations where, you know, I was back to being that deaf kid and not this superhero. But anyway, so in real life, as an adult, as a kid, I'm very non-confrontational. I have a lot of trouble confronting people. So this is very much what I might be like at a slumber party when the kids are trying to give me a makeover. It's like, no, 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 no. But the fantasy was, you know, me using my hearing aid and, you know, having these moments of revenge. They were revenge fantasies a lot of times. You know, let's just call it like it is, revenge. And then I had this enormous crush on this boy that lived a couple of houses down. And, you know, that's confrontation is to tell someone that you like them. So, you know, I couldn't do that. So real me is just, but fantasy me, Deafo me, is kissing the boy. I mean, come on. Surrounded by, you know, thought balloons. So Deafo had a very magical life, but always in that thought. So that's the difference.
So as I was thinking about questions to ask you on the panel and thumbing through the book, I had this realization that maybe I didn't have because I was always reviewing it chapter by chapter as we worked on one chapter at a time, and it wasn't until the end that I was looking at the whole book together. I don't think I appreciated how many characters you drew for this book, so I tried to go through and count, and I lost count after 200 rabbits. So I think that's another just Herculean task, but also to make them all look so distinct. So to talk a little bit about how your strategy for that.
Right. I felt like so much of the book takes place at school, and I needed to show one of my number one feelings was isolation, and you can't really show isolation unless you've got a lot of people in there, and so. A lot of my picture book work is already kind of busy. I mean, that was the number one criticism I got in art school. This is too busy. You're trying to do too many things. So I like doing this kind of thing, and it was fun to do that. But it was challenging to come up with different rabbits, but actually not that hard. It was just, you know, draw different basic shapes and hairstyles, and voila. You know, yeah, it wasn't too bad. Yeah.
One of the chapters that particularly stands out for me is the Sleepover, which you mentioned when you were talking about the fantasy sequence. I thought it was so smart the way you kind of color-coded the characters by pajamas, because they weren't characters we were all that familiar with coming into the chapter. And then later in the chapter, they play Twister.
Right.
So, and it made me realize you made the decision both to help us keep track of the characters, but also as this echo of the Twister game, because by the end, you're very emotionally twisted.
Right, very much so. Right. These are some of the Sleepover scenes. I didn't color the book, and we'll talk about that in a moment, but I did recommend to the colorist, David Lasky, that he keep, like when the characters first show up to the slumber party, that they be wearing a particular color of clothing, and that when they switched to their pajamas, the pajamas would remain the color of their previous clothes, so he could keep up with them. But yeah, this was a good chapter for me to write, because it's something that happened at every single sleepover. The lights go out, and when the lights go out, I was no longer a part of the group because I couldn't understand anything that was happening. So it was awful. So this is a good chapter.
Yeah.
And we had to introduce new characters to make it work, because that's what happens at a sleepover. You often end up meeting or ending up with people that you don't know very well.
The friends of your friends.
Friends of your friends. Yeah.
Yeah, this is when I think it was so revealing of your particular experience of a sleepover, but I think it's also such a universal experience because
definitely.
I think any girl, and maybe some guys too, has a bad sleepover.
Oh yeah, everybody feels left out at some point in their lives. Yeah,
so,
everybody. Yeah.
So you mentioned David Lasky,
right?
So you, we talked about.
He's disappeared. Let me find him real quick. There he is.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we talked about just how much work this was for you to draw, and that 2 years you spent almost. That was pretty much all you did. So we got to a point in the process of the book where we decided it would be too much for you to do the color as well, and so we asked David Lasky, but you also have a very long and loving relationship with David.
Right. So David is known for this book, which is fabulous, and also published by Abrams, The Carter Family. And he also does a lot of the pixely. I got all this stuff from the internet, so it's not reading very well, but he does some really, really neat comics, just amazing. And he's been doing it forever. But we had a different colorist, and he sort of jumped ship. He got too busy, and so I wrote a note to David Lasky because I had gone to college with David. And he was a couple of years older than me and my husband. We both, we were all friends in the graphics department at the college newspaper. And so I asked him, do you know any colorists? And he said, oh, I'll do it. I've got nothing better to do. And so he did it. And we had, all by email, he lives all the way in Seattle, and I'm in Virginia. And so we had all these powwows, emails, and so I shared some of my very original drawings, very different, so he could see what I had been thinking of the color. And the reason that we changed, Susan, one of her very early suggestions was, this looks too young, too picture booky almost. And I think she's right. We needed to age it up a little bit. But those are some of the original colors that I had picked out for myself. And that's another take on it. And then the other colorist, his version was very, very different, I think. A lot darker. And, so I wasn't 100% sure I even liked this. And so I showed David some other work that I admired, like Sarah Varon's work in the palette. And Frank Camuso, I really liked, I think my note was, I really like how Frank Camuso added new shapes with different values in the same colors to create form and shadow. And there were no gradients. I had this chip on my shoulder about gradients. I can't stand gradients. But I like these shapes. And so then I just shared some of the more, primary colors that I was looking for, and the way the registration, I liked all that stuff in the old superhero comics that I wanted him to use for some of the Deafo fantasy parts. So I shared all kinds of stuff, what kind of brush I was using, and then, this is too much information, but just notes for every page got shared throughout. Yeah. So it was neat. It was a really good experience, and I got a note back from him recently. He sent me a stack of his stuff, and he wrote, "You were the best boss I ever had." It was so nice, even though I wasn't his boss. But he was really good at listening to what I wanted and then doing it.
Yeah.
very successfully.
Well, and it's funny because when you knew him in college, he was a couple of years older than you, right? And in college, you know, that's
I'm
a lot
still
of
that
time.
way. I'm still that way around him.
Yeah,
and
so
it's a real honor for him to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he also did all that shading work, and he added a whole level of meaning with the shadows. You know, he was so, because of all of his experience, he was so attuned to, oh, this moment is darker and heavier, and so the shadows there would be more, and it was moodier. And, you know, this is a fun moment, less shadows. And he was really good at knowing what to do instinctively without me having to say, I want more shadows. So he was good. He was good. Yeah.
So I know that there was one chapter in particular in the book that gave you a lot of sort of concern, and you were very anxious about it even once the book was done. And that's the chapter in which your younger self rejects sign language.
Right,
Your mom has made a decision to take you to a sign language class, and in each class you're very you're the kid who won't participate, and then it sort of culminates in you kicking your mother. And I know that you were very anxious about how that would be received by sign language users, and particularly in the deaf community, because it was your very personal experience and you didn't want it to seem reflective of the sort of bigger experience.
Right. This was by far the hardest chapter. I think the one we spent the longest time on. I mean, wrote it and rewrote it. And I would go to bed just in a cold sweat, just thinking, oh, the capital D deaf community and anybody who uses sign language is going to hate me when this book comes out. And but a little explanation: when I lost my hearing, I went to a public school in Richmond, Virginia, that had a program with for deaf kids. And so I started out in kindergarten with a group like everybody wearing hearing aids, and we were taught. This was 1975. We were taught lip reading, but we were not taught sign language, because the thinking back then was, if you teach deaf kids who have any residual hearing, if you teach them sign language, then that will become a crutch and they will never become oral or read lips. But as an adult, I completely disagree with this, because not every deaf kid or deaf person can lip read. And I think all of those different kinds of languages should be introduced so that whatever can stick and work is there. But that's not how it was then. So because I was surrounded by hearing people after that kindergarten year, I was in a regular school, no other deaf kids around. You know, I wanted to fit in, and my fear was, if I learn sign language, then everybody is going to be staring at me and watching me. And so I started to see if anybody who ever tried to use sign language with me as a mime, you know, an annoying mime. And that's not really what they were, but that's how I felt. So it was just really scary putting that bad attitude out there into the world. And so what I ended up doing to kind of solve that was, in the classroom scenes, the sign language teacher, she has this long speech, and she says, well, American Sign Language, it's vital for their communication with other deaf people and with their friends. And the teacher is saying all the things that I believe as an adult. And I put that in there, but that I had to be careful that it was never me thinking those things. I needed to be honest about who I was. But the nice thing is, and I sort of make the point too, that I could have used sign language, because often my hearing aid batteries run down. I can't hear anything. And I'm not always the best lip reader. So, and this is what's happening on this page. I can't hear anything. If I knew sign language, I might have been able to, you know, communicate better. So I'm trying to make the point that it really could have helped. But, and then of course, in that scene up there, I'm kicking my mother so that we can stop going to these sign language classes, and I won that battle, I have to say, and not in a way I didn't win at all, because it might have been a good thing. But luckily, the deaf community and the people who use sign have been absolutely 100% welcoming in the best possible way. That has been one of the nicest things that has happened is they still say, oh, even though you don't know sign and we don't communicate the same way, I had so many of the same experiences you had anyway. We have enough shared things that it ended up being okay. And I was very careful to write about that in the afterword too. Here you go. I don't feel that way now.
Right.
So yeah, it was tough.
So as you know, I came away from working on the book with a huge admiration for your mother.
No, yes.
And actually, one of my favorite moments in the book, which I really thought a lot about because I was a new mom when I was working on this, is a scene in which you are, I think you're having trouble seeing, right? And so your teacher thinks that you're cheating
Right.
on a quiz, but you weren't. But she's convinced that you are, and so you're going home from school, and you're sure that you're going to be in big trouble, and your mom gives you a hostess cherry pie because she'd run into your teacher and heard the story and clearly believed that just knew that there must have been a misunderstanding. And she knew you would need cheering up. So she gives you the cherry pie. And that was, I thought, such a wonderful mom and daughter moment. And then your brother, Ashley, also has this wonderful moment where when you're coming home from the hospital, he's hidden little paper boats around the house for you to find with candy in them, which is just such a wonderful older brother, younger sister moment. And Ashley and your mom are here today, so I'm going to make them wave to everybody.
Yeah, I think I often wonder about, this moment really, really stands out in my memory. It's just so seared, the coming home, and then Ashley had made these little paper boats, and said, yeah, look around, you'll find candy in them, try not to cry. But then probably a week later, he was back to, probably. But I do know that they're quite a bit older. I was 4, and my sister would have been 9, and I guess 9, and Ashley was probably about 11. So they were probably pretty freaked out. Their little sister in the hospital, and then everything changed. And so, but that really, really, really stands out, both of those moments. And what was cool about the Hostess fruit pie is that Hostess fruit pies are a big part of superhero comics because of those advertisements, but that's literally true. It was Hostess. I love those things. And they're really delicious.
Really delicious and evil.
And evil, yes.
So this kind of brings me to, I think, another kind of tricky aspect of putting this book together is that it is a memoir and it's based on real experiences.
Right.
And those were two of the sort of sweeter things that you experienced, but you also you had some pretty dark experiences too with real people who you depicted in the book, friends who maybe weren't as good friends as they could be.
Right.
And did that give you sort of any trepidation, particularly since you still live in the area in which you grew up?
Right. That was really, really tricky. And one of the girls in that photo is the inspiration for Laura, who in the book, and that's the name that got changed. The code for El Deafo is, in case you're wondering, well, whose names are real and whose are not real. The characters that I was nice to and come across as lovely people, those are their real names. The people that I was completely unfair to changed their name. And one of the things that was really important for me, and I think Susan helped me stay to the path, was make sure to tell this story from kid Cece point of view, not from adult. And so that being said, as an adult, you can look back at your friendships, and then you'll you'll think, for example, the inspiration for Laura, I didn't know this as a kid because, a lot of times you're just not aware. Laura's parents were splitting up. She was going through a really bad time, and sometimes that makes kids mean, and then they act out. And she was acting out on me. I didn't know all this. I knew that as an adult. And so I couldn't put that in the book because it wouldn't ring true. So I just put what I knew of that character at the time, which was she could be a great friend, a lot of fun, but she could also be a bully. And so, but she does still live in the town where I grew up, and very close to where I live now. So I avoid the street that she lives. I still do not know if she's read the book. I kind of think she probably has or is aware of it. But, oh well, it needed to be in the book. It was an important relationship. And then another friend is much more complicated. The girl in the photo, I changed her name too, and I think we're still friends, but I don't know for sure. She really did talk like this, and this is actually two real people merged into one character to simplify it, but she was much closer to this person in real life. And she still kind of talks to me like this as an adult. So I don't know. I really don't know. And this one was hard, the harder one of the two, because I didn't like this girl anymore at all. I mean, you're off my list, but this girl is still on my list. And so, but this was also an important thing to show. And ultimately, I just decided, oh, well, it's my book. I'll just, I wanted so badly to be honest and to share this aspect of being deaf with people, just to help them realize that this doesn't work. It doesn't help to talk loud and slowly. It just makes it harder. So, but then other people were real and wonderful. One of the kids in that photo was Mike Miller. I'm not sure if you can tell, and Mike Miller is the boy that I had the big crush on, and then Martha is the character, and those are their real names. Martha, we are still very, very close friends. I'm going to spend a whole week with her in a couple of weeks. So that's been and it's been really, really, this book in a lot of ways was a gift to her. And I think she's very excited to be in the book. And I think what she likes the most is when kids draw fan art and she's in the fan art. And she's just like, oh my gosh, it's me. And that's Martha. And then later, 30 years after Mike Miller moved away, I met up with him in San Diego, and he grew up to be very, very handsome. And what a dreamboat. So I happened to have my old phonic ear with me and the Keisha's microphone, so we reenacted stuff like that. That's Mike, and then that's Martha, and so she's still as nutty as she was in the book. So those are some of those characters.
So my next question is completely self-interested. Are you considering a follow-up book?
Ashley and I were joking about this last night, so I'm going to go ahead and use what I said last night. But I want there to be, very much so, and it's percolating. And if there's an El Deafo 2, it would, oddly enough, be, I think, the theme that would bind it together is music.
Oh, that's
so think about that.
Okay,
Just be thinking about it.
Right.
So, but what I wanted to say was what I really want to work on is a graphic novel about Grey Gardens, Grey Gardens,
Oh, yeah.
but from the raccoon's point of view.
Oh my God. Okay. I'm in.
I want you to publish that. Yeah.
That wasn't what I was expecting you to say. I do have one more question, actually. Is there anything that you're reading and admiring, either graphic novels or books for kids?
Books for kids. I just read Nimona, and that was lots and lots of fun. That was really neat. I really admire Noelle Stevenson's her style and the way she tells the story. That was great. And I've actually been reading more middle grade novels lately. I've read Echo, which is good, and The Hired Girl, just books that have been sent to me. So I'm trying to read more, but I haven't been reading as many graphic novels for some reason than
Taking a break.
I guess, yeah. And I tend to get really jealous of other people's work, and like, and I don't like having that sensation while I'm reading their work. Like, takes me out of the story because I'm so busy thinking, oh, they can really draw, So that's really, it makes it tricky sometimes to fully, because you're just jealous. Yeah, it's weird. It's weird. It's a weird thing.
So, so I think we do have time for questions from you all. And Cece just asked that if you would use the microphone, this microphone.
Yeah.
Does anybody want to come up and?
Okay.
Oh.
And I'll take it over to it. You can just hold it like you would a microphone. Okay.
The book that you showed us of Roller Girl, I have that book.
You have that book? Which book was it?
Roller Girl.
Oh, Roller. You have Roller Girl. Isn't it good? Yeah. Well, I'm glad you have that book.
Huh?
Do you like it? You do?
Yeah.
Good. I'm glad you got that book. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Oh,
Yeah, sure.
okay. We have a bearded man, so.
You mentioned music for the
Music,
next?
yes,
What's your connection to music?
Okay, good. That's a great question.
I've been to Floyd, Virginia.
I'm from Virginia. Yeah. Oh, you live
I've
in.
been to Floyd.
You've been to Floyd. I'm very close to Floyd.
Fantastic.
Very, very close to Floyd. It's a great art scene. Yeah.
Sure.
Music. One of the things that happens a lot with music, or people's perceptions of me and music, is, oh, you must not be able to hear or enjoy music. Well, hearing aids work, and even though probably my experience of music is not like someone with normal hearing, I'm still getting all of the the melodies and the beat and all of that. And so I ended up really, really loving music, and I was lucky, my brother who's here, he had great stuff. He was bringing home great stuff, and it was all stuff that, it's like deaf people's music. And number one on that list, and I've heard from a lot of other deaf people, the Beatles. The Beatles are just like the perfect music for deaf people, especially Paul McCartney songs, because his melodies are so, it's not this, it's, and then Burt Bacharach is another great deaf person's music, because there's a lot going on, but it's not crowded, and it's not, And then for something like an El Deafo too, in 1981, when MTV showed up, and I had sort of a visual thing to go with the music, suddenly I was able to have conversations with my friends in middle school. It's like, oh man, isn't Human League great? I saw Boy George and he's fantastic, and all that put me on the same level all of a sudden when I hadn't been able to keep up. I was listening to what my brother brought home, which I still like better than anything, the Beatles and Burt Bacharach, and if, Sergio Mendes and Brazil 66, and that, there's really neat, the lady singers with those perfect voices, and they're not warbling and, I don't want that. So I love music, and people are always surprised to know that deaf people enjoy music, but they're getting stuff out of it. It's just in a completely different, not a completely different, just a different way. So, and what's been hard is I've lost more hearing as I've gotten older, just getting older and everything, and it's made music less enjoyable, sadly. So I'm sort of relying on memory to, which is okay, but still every now and then you're like, I just want to hear Joni Mitchell the way I heard it 20 years ago, and it's sad when you can't do that, you know. But I mean, it's a meaningful thing to me, definitely. Yeah, it's a long answer. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah. Anybody else? Come on up. Is there anything else that you want to
Oh,
share
yeah.
about?
I have a slide, and this is my favorite page from any book, any graphic book ever, and it's from this book called The Bad Speller by the children's book author and illustrator William Steig, and it says bad spelling. Dog trying to masquerade as a donkey, but his friends can smell who he is. So this is what I aspire to. And so I'm hoping that someday I can do this because it's the best thing. Do you know this book?
No.
It's
that's
awesome.
That is.
Pages and pages of this.
I can see the influence. Though.
Yeah, awesome. So I will leave you with that image. Awesome.
All right. One more chance for questions. They're good. Okay. All right. Well, thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you.